Hi everyone. Oh my God. Okay. My name is Tim Yang, and I'm one of the programmers for the Asian American Cultural Center, also known as ASAC abbreviated. And today we are very excited to present the film Finding Samuel Lowe, From Harlem to China, and we thank you for coming. After the film, Professor and Associate Vice Provost for Research Nell Vera Lowe will also be leading a discussion, so be sure to stick around for that. At its heart, this is a story about familial love and devotion that transcends race, space, and time. The film explores the lives of three successful black siblings from Harlem who discovered their heritage by searching for clues about their long-lost Chinese grandfather, Samuel Lowe, taking them from Harlem to Toronto to China. And this event is part of the MIXed program, a joint initiative out of the Asian American and Puerto Rican and Latin American Cultural Centers, which focuses on mixed ethnic heritage identity. We want to thank our co-sponsors, the Yukon Half Asian Peoples Association and the African American Cultural Center, which is also celebrating their 50th anniversary and just completed Black History Month. Thank you, and please enjoy the show.
Hello, my name is Sarah Moore. I am the Vice President of Yukon Hakka, and I'm a part of the MIXed program here at Yukon. And I'm just going to be giving a brief introduction to the leader of our discussion on the movie, Dr. Nell Vera Williams. Dr. Williams is the Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Connecticut. She's trained as a clinical psychologist and joined the university more than 20 years ago as a faculty member in the Department of Psychological Studies, with a joint appointment in the Institute of Africana Studies. In addition to her faculty appointment, she has served in several administrative roles, including Associate Dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Director of Clinical Training for the doctoral program in Clinical Psychology, and as head of the Clinical Psychology Division. Her research interests focus on the role of race and culture on psychological well-being, recovery from traumatic experiences, and cultural competence training. She has worked closely with the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services to address racial and ethnic health disparities within the state of Connecticut, and was a founding member of the Connecticut Ethnic Diversity Task Force. She is also the co-director of the Minority Advancement Program in Psychology, and this is a mentor program designed to prepare students of color for graduate school and careers in psychology. Without further ado, Dr. Williams.
So I am a Williams. You saw a number of Williamses reflected in the video. I, unfortunately, am not rich. I am not part owner of the Los Angeles Sparks. I have no relationship whatsoever to the Williamses that you just saw. I am not a member of the Lowe family, but I do appreciate very much being able to be here today. So this is supposed to be a discussion. And so if I were to put myself in the experience of Paula Madison, I would be looking for, in my family line, kin. As someone who is mixed race, my mother is Korean, my father is African American. So it was a pleasure for me to be given this invitation from the Hakka Association, because being half Asian and understanding what that experience is like, but also the reflection of what you saw in the video today, of what it means to be a mixed race person of Asian ancestry and also of African ancestry, and how you think about identity and how you think about culture. So that's part of what I'm hoping we'll be able to talk about today, not just the specifics of the video itself, but also because this is going to represent a wide range of people's experiences. And when we think about culture, we think about identity. So I'm hoping that's what we'll be able to sort of share with each other today. So it's meant to be a discussion. It feels kind of odd to say you're going to lead a discussion when I'm standing up here and I'm the only one with the microphone right now, and most of you are sort of scattered around. So you can sort of stay where you're at, but I'm hoping what you'll do is come forward and we can have kind of a discussion amongst ourselves. I'm going to throw out a couple of themes and things that that sort of resonated with me when I watched the video and got a chance to see the family and how the individuals connected with each other. But if you have an opportunity to sort of, I want you to be able to sort of share what your impressions are, whether it's specific to the video itself, to the documentary, or whether it's to your own personal experiences. So I think it's an opportunity for us to have that kind of broader discussion. So one of the things that sort of struck me, I'm going to throw out a couple of things for you to think about, and I hope folks come up and share your impressions. As Sarah mentioned, I am a clinical psychologist by training. So much of what I see through that lens in this video is really kind of what I sense as what it must be like for someone who feels a sense of abandonment. So that was a central theme for me. When I listened to Paula talk about what it must have been like for her mother, there's a lot of this kind of loss. But much of that loss is around feeling disconnected or left behind or lost. So you think about Samuel Lowe, consider the journey that he would have taken back in the late 1800s at that time, going from China to Jamaica, traveling on his own. At that period of time, you were seeing Chinese immigrants come to North America, whether it was in the United States, in the Caribbean, or parts of South America, often coming as indentured servants. So they were coming to work. They were often coming from very poor communities. Samuel Lowe had a wife, a Chinese wife, while he was in Jamaica. But he also then fathered children with 2 Jamaican women, all around the same time. And they didn't seem to know very much about each other, or at least we don't get a good sense of whether or not the 3 primary siblings, Adassa, Nell, and Gilbert, if they were aware of each other. The 2 girls were born within a month of each other, so they're the same age, Adassa, and their grandmother, their mother, Nell. And yet they didn't seem to have any knowledge of each other, or at least what she disclosed to her children, because you don't really know how much Nell knew about her family in Jamaica. All you know is what she chose to share with her children. And then Samuel makes a decision in 1934 to go back to China. While in Jamaica, he has 3 children, but he only takes 1 back with him. He only takes 1 of his 3 children. So what would that be like for the 2 children left behind, that their father went back to China but only took 1 of the siblings? And what would that have been like for Adassa as a mixed race person going back to China at the age of 16 to a country that she's never been to without the 1 sibling that she knows she has, Gilbert? So now she's in China, and that's where she spends the bulk of her life. And what would that experience have been like for her? So those are some things that came through for me. The other piece that I think that they did not really spend much time on, because this was really an opportunity for the family to connect and find, in terms of their family lineage and feeling connected, they didn't really talk much about what it must have been like for those individuals and their experiences. What must it have been like in Jamaica in the 1920s and 30s if you were mixed race, if you were Jamaican and Chinese? And what must it have been like for Adassa to go back to China and to be a mixed race person? She must have been a fairly isolated in terms of her experiences. She wouldn't have looked like a lot of the people around her. She wouldn't have initially spoke the language as a teenager going back to China. And would she have been easily accepted? So we saw a lot of family embrace because people were finding each other. But what would those individuals' experiences have actually been like in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s? So those are my sort of general questions that I'm throwing out for folks. Does anybody want to come up and sort of share their impressions or any responses? Am I going to have to come out and grab some people? Am I going to have to call you out? I'm a clinical psychologist. I can do it and make you feel real guilty about it. No impressions at all? Well, I'm going to ask you to come up. I'm going to start pointing folks out. I got no shame. I'll do it.
Yeah, actually,
Can you come up so people can hear you?
Sure. So I suppose this is kind of off of what you were talking about. Something that went through my mind a lot, particularly as the family was meeting again, is knowing the circumstances in which they were separated.
Mm-hmm.
How does that impact then they come together again later? Does that kind of have any tension, the feeling of resentment of, your father kind of left without us, and then they come together just decades upon decades later, and how that can impact the children and grandchildren of that?
It's a very good question. So I'm going to throw it out there. How many of you, how would you feel if you discovered, like today, you're an adult, everyone here is an adult? Anybody not 18 years old? Anybody over the age of 25? I want you to see. Nobody's over the age of 25? No. Besides you? 2? Anybody over the age of 30? The pain. The babies. So, but you're all adults. Imagine, what would your experience be like if you discovered today that you had siblings? Like 5 of them, that you had no idea existed until today. How would you feel?
I feel.
If you can talk loud enough. Yes. Are they actually on? I think it's got a switch on it. Oh.
It's working. Yes, it is. Okay.
This work? Yeah, okay. So I actually was really moved by this whole movie. I hadn't really heard of this before, but I was really happy I came to see it. So I'm an only child, and like my family we don't have that much like back past. Like I know we don't like really know where we come from. I could be half something, I could be half anything, I could be half whatever. I don't even know, because it's like my mom, like after her parents, like I don't know anything past that, and like slavery, except like she was saying like slavery is in our past and everything in the beginning, and that really resonated with me, because like I feel like I know what could go past that, but like I don't know anything from after that. I know on my dad's side a little bit, but we don't have the reunions, we don't like gather, and we don't really see each other. We had a couple when I was younger, maybe like 8 was my last family reunion, and like there's a bunch of people there, you have all your cousins, like everything's great. But like no one really stayed like in contact, and so I feel like they're gonna end up staying in contact. Like they're like, we're visiting someone every year, like that's just how our family is. And I thought that was really great. And I'm actually also an only child, so like if someone would like hang out with me, and you said like you got like 5 random siblings, I don't care where they came from, I'd be so happy. I would like not care if it was someone who cheated somewhere or someone who did this and that. Like I would have siblings, and that would be like the best thing for me. Thank you. So I would just accept it, and at the end, like, it didn't matter that, like, their father had gone and had 2 relations with 2 different women in Jamaica. Like, they were just happy to know each other. They were just happy to, like, complete the thing. And honestly, I was kind of tearing up because I was like, that is amazing, and I wish that was the case for me. Like, I would love if that happened. And so that's just how my thing was. Like, I was really happy with them. Like, they were all happy. Like, no one had any resentment or any, like, sadness about that. They were like, our family is complete. And I'm like, that is so beautiful and nice. And so I kind of wish that was the case. That I would like 5 random siblings, but probably not, because my mom was pretty sure she only had 1 child. My dad, they don't have 1 child. We're still together, so that's not really a chance. But I thought that was really beautiful and like really nice. Like their thing is family. They're not gonna have any resentment about the fact that their father like went a bunch of places and didn't like really tell them they existed, because now they found each other and like now they're back together, and that's like a really good message.
Okay. There was someone else? You want to come up? Let me just, as a show of hands, as you come up. Yeah, come on. How many of you can know your family background to your grandparents? Know really well up into your grandparents? How about great-grandparents? Great-great-grandparents? Great-great-great-grandparents? You're the only one? How far back can you go?
Oh, for me, I can go back, I think, 7 generations. Because, like, our family's kind of separated between, like, Guyana and here. So it's a lot of, like, the same kind of people that just keep coming back.
And staying connected to the
Yes.
story. And how far back can you go?
Really, 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 really far back.
More than 7 generations?
More than 7 years.
What is 7 generations? Is that more than 150 years?
Depending on how you calculate it, yeah.
But most people look like you can go to your grandparents for sure, great-grandparents, and then it started to dwindle.
I'm Lucille,
Mm-hmm.
a senior here. I was definitely also moved by the film to answer your question particularly. I would embrace my newfound siblings, but I would be angry. I would be very upset because being the oldest of 5 children right now, I have 3 younger sisters and a younger brother. So with how close we are and being raised by a single mom, and like my siblings are my best friends. So to find out that I had 5 random siblings that I had no idea about and going on 22 years of life and having no contact with them, I would be very upset.
Mm-hmm. How about other folks? Yeah, sure.
I wanted to stay off of what you were saying of just this feeling that your family history was just taken from you. What you were saying and watching the film reminded me a lot of an experience I had a couple of winters ago where I went to Poland. I went to visit the concentration camps there, and to visit, amongst others, Auschwitz. And there they have just this huge book of names. And I don't know how I didn't realize this before, because I thought, oh, there's no way I have family related to that. But just the probability is that I do. There's a greater probability I do than that I don't. And just this feeling of that there's a family out there that was taken from you and you don't know about them and you don't know how to find out about them. And that there's a good chance that they were even murdered and I don't even know about that. And it's just a very bizarre, discomforting feeling. Yeah.
How about other folks? You suddenly discovered you had siblings, aunts and uncles. Nobody would feel a little disconcerted. Go right in.
Hi.
Hi.
So my family actually has quite the history, I would say, or at least one side of it that I know of. My grandfather on my dad's side, when he was growing up, he was like in China, and during that time it was around that time that was the Japanese occupation of China, where the Japanese came into China and kind of like did stuff. And my grandfather was fled from China to Taiwan, where he started a new family, and that family was my family. The funny thing is, he had a family in China, and he actually like had kids there, you know. And then many years later, he told my grandmother, "By the way, I have a family in China." To which she was like, "What?" And like, eventually, they actually went back to China to visit that old family that he had left because he was like being a refugee or something. And when my dad told me this, I was like, "Whoa, that's intense." You know, that's like a lot. Like, because I was like, "Wow, he just really like he had to leave that family behind." And then he still had a new family in Taiwan and everything. And like, for me, this film kind of brought up a lot of the same feelings because like you had this Samuel Lowe who left Jamaica and who like left behind some of the other kids, I believe. And I was just finding myself relating to it, even though it wasn't a mixed race story or anything like that. Just like wow, you know, like the lesson I took away more or less was family is really, really complex sometimes, you know. is just something that's like really wide-reaching and like surprising in a sense.
Mhm. Absolutely. Anyone else have impressions? So one of the things that that I thought was very powerful about the story is how much of the sense of longing that the Williams children, the siblings had, was so connected to how much they missed of how much of their mother they actually had present for them. And I don't know if that sort of came through to so much of Paula's experiences. It was very hard to disentangle how much of that longing was actually hers and how much of that longing was what she thought her mother missed, or how much of her mother she might not have had growing up because she saw her mother as someone who had this kind of distant past, this longing, this sense of abandonment. They didn't know very much about their grandfather, but what they did know was their mother didn't know anything about him. That at age of 3 was the last time she saw her father. And that different siblings found out, well, then he tried to find her or that he left. But all they knew was, from their mother's perspective, she had no father and that she longed for that father. So how much of the children are really a reflection of how much they miss their mother. And the fact that you saw at the end, their mother actually lived to be quite old. But it doesn't look like this journey actually really began for them until she passed away. So you almost have to ask yourself, why didn't they do this search sooner? If there was so much pain attached to their mother and the sense of loss, they've been wealthy for a number of years. They've been curious. The oldest brother, Elrick, went to Hong Kong back in the 1970s. That was 30 years prior to them going in 2012. Why didn't this happen 30 years ago? Any guesses? Anybody can speculate? Oh, this young man and then actually. Not young, sorry. Why do you think they waited so long?
I think part of it might have been more of a motivation once they lost their mother. They could have been longing while she was alive. She could have been longing, and especially if it's something that was touchy, they might not have been talking about it like that. Like, they're definitely learning bits and pieces of the history, but the touchiness of it and actually searching, once you lose somebody as important and prominent in your life, like a parent, I can only imagine like that would be the motivation to be like, okay, like this is something that we wanted to find out, that we need to know, and now that we're missing this key piece, we feel even more empty, like you need to fill that with something, so why not the rest of your family that you've been looking for?
What about other folks? Any guesses? Yeah.
At least from the way it seemed to be kind of structured in the film, it appeared that she went on this search after she retired. It could have been, pursuing her career and ultimately becoming very successful in her career was the way that she found to honor her mother. But after her career, she wanted to find kind of this new way to continue honoring her mother, and that might have led to her taking the time now to pursue this.
How many? Yep. Can't hear you. Folks right there.
I think it also has to do with the fact that, like, when you interview somebody, part of you wants to know more about them.
Part of you wants to know like more about them, and just like because you miss somebody so much, you want to be able to get all the information on them and just kind of like feel like you really know them, and that there's another way you could be close with them. So I think with her and her brother is really like the missing gap, because they were raised by a single mother. It just was something to help them fill that emptiness that they felt because their mother was the only thing that they had from their Chinese background.
It's probably some of all of those things. What makes it a little hard, though, is if you look at Paula in this film, doesn't she look like the super emotive kind of person? That she would have been someone that would have felt this very deeply for a long period of time? And you kind of go, well, why didn't she do this sooner? Why didn't she do this where her mother could have benefited from this experience? She's been thinking about it. She had the means. She was feeling it in a way that more so, at least visually, what you saw in the documentary, in the film, than her brothers, who were a little bit more kind of, they clearly had wanted to do this. This was, the three of them had put this effort in, but yet Paula was the one that was sort of front and center. She was the one that had the connection, the emotional connection, and you saw her feeling it in a very personal way. Something to consider, oh, sorry.
I think that the emergence of like just technology and moving forward in like the modern day, and like with how she found out that his trip back was in 1933. Like, you know, she just searched up Samuel Lowe 1934, and that like the search results came out to that, and I think that also really helps with the whole search process. And I think that like technology is helping bring the world together, because I know personally most of my, like 98% of my family is back in the Philippines, and I know that my parents are like, they miss it a lot, and they honestly, I'm pretty sure the only reason why they've lasted this long is not only because of us, but because they can like still talk to their family like through Facebook. They can still call them. We call them at least like once a month. We send them things every other month. So I think that also helps with like the whole like process of that. So yeah.
Timing, the opportunity to search and find each other. You know, so as I said, I'm a clinical psychologist, so it's always hard for me not to look at human experiences, both from the lens of someone who thinks about what it's like for that person as an individual, psychologically, emotionally, but as someone who studies race and culture, and as someone who is a multiracial person, it's also hard for me not to look at this through the lens of someone from that sort of experience, what that experience is like. And so one of the things that I was sort of taken by, if I take that clinical lens, is a lot of individuals, when you look at their history, when you look at immigrants and how they move to new countries, and the reason why they leave a home country to go to a new country, when there's a lot of pain and trauma attached to those experiences, there's a tendency to try to be very protective of your children to spare them that pain. It's sometimes a misguided sense of protection, because you feel so much pain, you feel so much loss, you feel so much struggle as you are trying to navigate new country, all of the challenges. Clearly, you would have experienced discrimination. And Samuel Lowe would have experienced discrimination, being Chinese. At that time, moving to Jamaica, you're looking at no more than a few hundred Chinese men in the early 1850s or so. At the height, you're looking at no more than like 12,000 Chinese in Jamaica. So you're talking about a relatively small percentage of the population, and having to deal with what that must have been like where you may not have been easily embraced. So it was a little different in the West Indies than it was in the United States. At the very same time, you had the same kind of Chinese migration to the United States to work on the railroads, working in the gold mines, lots of discrimination. You couldn't marry. That was a little different in Jamaica. So being able to have children with the Chinese migrants that came in was a little easier to do. Still weren't getting married, but the ability to sort of have children and raise families. So there's a lot of pain. So even for Samuel Lowe, keeping all of these people that are his children, he may in fact have had a deep connection and love for all three children, but dealing with the pain of which child. Maybe the decision was as simple as which child looks the most Chinese. That's the one I take back with me, because that's the one that may have the easiest time managing, and the one that I might be able to protect. The same thing with Nell, Paula's mother. Imagine all of that pain she had of feeling lost and abandoned. Can you imagine what that experience would have been like at 16? You get the gumption up to go, I need to go find my father. I need to know why he left. Maybe he's looking for me, and literally you show up and you find out you just missed him. And he's not coming back. you would want to spare some of that pain for your children because you don't want them to experience that trauma. But oftentimes what you end up seeing happen is the exact same thing that you see with the Williams family is every attempt by the parents or the family to protect from that pain, you end up seeing evidence of that pain anyway. And that having shared some of those experiences could have avoided, to some degree, maybe some of that sense of loss. Maybe not. It doesn't mean that there would have been the same kind of reunion that took place. Could have been even more resentment. Can you imagine in Jamaica, between Gilbert, Adassa, and Nell, what if they had found each other? Even back in the 1930s. They could have been very resentful of each other's relationships. You have no idea. But that's some of what you see when parents are trying to protect. They often, their attempts to avoid or remove that pain may in fact still create that same kind of pain and loss. So that was my sort of clinical lens looking at that going, secrets, pain, trauma, and desire to sort of protect the people that you love. And hoping that they will be able to avoid those same pain and loss. Only that they end up feeling that pain and loss anyway. Now from the cultural lens, this is an event that part of the experience is really what it must be like for individuals who knew they were part Chinese, didn't have any connection to Chinese culture. The only reference they had is their mother. And what it's like for them, the world will see at least two of those three siblings as African American and African American only. But they now have an identity that's connected to some degree to being Chinese. So what is that going to be like for them? They've acquired this cultural identity that may actually be very inconsistent with the way the rest of the world sees them. Anybody have those kinds of experiences? No? What's the name of the organization that sponsored this? Can someone remind me what it's called? Does anyone remember? What is the name of the organization?
This film actually hit home really hard because my grandfather would actually be in the place of Paula's mother, and how she mentioned her family is very close, how close she is with her siblings, and how when she was younger, kids would say they're going to visit family members and things like that. That was me as a child. I have my two parents and my younger sister, and every summer, or like even like week-long breaks, friends would be like, oh yeah, I'm going to the next state over to see this family member and that family member. Whereas the only family that I truly have a deep connection with are my family in England. And that's pretty much it. But I have Chinese heritage as well as Indian, English, and Native American. And although I was never brought up with any Chinese culture whatsoever, because my mother, who's Chinese Jamaican, had that disconnect because of my grandfather. So the whole movie, I literally sat there nodding my head the entire time, because truly her upbringing is exactly how I felt for the longest. And it was just eerie to know that the thoughts that I've had for my sister and I have constantly thought about wanting to search for our distant family and wanting to take on the cultures that we were born with, but we've always had that doubt as to whether we'd be welcomed, whether we'd be accepted for being multicultural, and it just was an eye-opener. This was definitely a motivational step for me to continue to look into my culture and to hopefully maybe even have the same outcome as she did with finding her own family. So
Taking a little risk?
definitely.
Good. I'll keep tabs on you, see how it goes. I mentioned that I am half Asian myself. I am, as I mentioned, Korean. So my mother's Korean, my father's African American. I have 2 siblings, both of whom look very Korean, much more so than I do. So growing up, I was the most strongly identified of the 3 siblings as someone who was biracial, but specifically that I connected very strongly with my Korean identity as well as African American identity, much less so than my 2 siblings, who physically look more Asian than I do. So growing up, there was always this kind of disconnect that the world saw me not necessarily as African American, usually some version of everything, looking a little racially ambiguous. So I would look like lots of things, but very rarely would anyone say Korean or Asian. And the people who were the most shocked to find out that I was half Korean were other Koreans. It was the most disconcerting. Whereas my sister can walk into a Korean market, a Korean restaurant, and there's an immediate kind of affinity, a gravitation toward her. In Atlanta, we call it the Korean discount. So she goes in, 20% off the top. Whatever it is, when we go to the Korean market, she gets 20% off the top. She doesn't even have to negotiate. They just sort of know, you get a little discount. I walk in, first thing is usually, it's a Chinese restaurant? There's a disconnect because I don't look like what's expected of somebody who is Asian descent or half Asian. But my cultural identity is much more strongly tied to both being African American and being Korean because of the values, the way I sort of think, the way I was raised, primarily with my mother as the primary influence. So it's very hard to not connect to Korean culture when that's been the primary framework of how I was raised and see the world. But it does mean that I have to walk through the world a particular way. I could say, I don't really care what anybody thinks and how they see me. I am who I am, and that's the way they're going to interact with me. It would mean I would have a lot of difficult, challenging interactions with folks. It would also mean that I would be denying the way the world would potentially see me and interact with me. And in some ways, I would be saying that other people's realities of me apparently aren't real. They're not based on things. But they are. They're based on their experiences. They're based on their understanding of what an Asian person looks like, or an Asian person talks like, or an Asian person thinks like. And it's the same as there are going to be expectations of what an African American person looks like, thinks like, talks like. So that's the other piece of this dynamic, is thinking about when we talk about culture and we talk about identity, what does that actually mean? It's what you live, what you breathe, what you experience, but it's also how it is that the rest of the world interacts with you. It's one of the nice things about organizations like Hakka and other organizations on campus, because it allows you to have an opportunity to talk and interact with folks who might have similar kinds of experiences. It also allows you to kind of vent and talk about what those experiences are. But it also makes you sort of realize that things that you think are universal often are not. That something may be very unique to your experience, that it doesn't translate as well to other people's experiences, even though you may share the same ethnic, cultural backgrounds, or you may have the same physical appearances. Mm-hmm. So how many of you are actually mixed race and identify as mixed race? Was there anything about what you saw in the video today that resonated with your cultural identity and experiences? Anyone else? I see some head nodding, but I'm not seeing people share. No? How many of you have had the experience of having to explain your ethnic or racial background. How many of you have had that asked of you in ways that you found offensive? And what do you say in response? What have you heard? Where are you from? What are you? Right? Those usually are the ones that sort of make people. What do you answer?
I've had people say that when I really go to the Mexico, where you're from, and I always just say I'm black, and then they'll be like, but where are you actually from? And I'll be like, America. And be like, and they just kind of think, okay. And people are asked okay, well, what? I do a lot of things with I'm part of the West Indian Cultural Center. Like in the AACC, everyone's kind of included. I do a lot of West Indian things with people just because I like the culture too, and everyone includes people. And so everyone always assumes I'm from some kind of West Indian area, and when I don't have an actual answer to say, they're just okay, and I'm just I don't know. But they just say I'm just black, just American, I'm me. That's basically my go-to answers.
What about other folks? How do you answer that question?
Well, I'm Asian, and usually when I tell people that, they're Asian, you don't look Asian, or you must be something else. Well, your hair is too nice.
Your hair is too nice to just be black. You have to be something else. Or they're oh, do you do voodoo? So I feel there's a lot of ignorance when it comes to what people look like or what a certain group of people is supposed to be. So.
Yep.
My parents are from Sri Lanka, and well, first of all, it's geographically hard to explain. Not hard to explain, but a lot of people don't know where it is. And also, to answer the previous question, I'm much lighter skinned than a lot of my family, and I didn't. To this day, I don't know why I'm so light skinned. But a lot of my cousins, for instance, are almost black in skin color. And a lot of Sri Lankans are very, very dark. So when I go to Sri Lanka, people sort of look at me a little bit weird. He might be a little bit different. So it does seem a little bit weird. And actually, I recently figured that I'm not mixed with anything. I'm pure Sri Lankan. My uncle took some sort of genealogy test, and I was certain that there's going to be something that might cause it, but there was nothing. Just and real quickly, I wanted to talk on one of the other questions that you asked before. My parents moved to Connecticut in the 90s, and well, first of all, there are not a lot of Sri Lankans in the United States. And there's certainly no one in Connecticut. There are some in Boston and a lot in Los Angeles, but in general, the Sri Lankans around the world are in places like Malaysia, Australia, definitely the UK. So growing up, it was just my dad, my mom, and my sister. And I had gone to California, where some of my family is, a couple of times, but for the most part, I have family literally all over the world, a lot in Sri Lanka, but all over the world. So, and Sri Lanka is really hard to travel, well, it's expensive to travel to. So, the times that I finally went there, it's oh, here's this family member, here's this bit, and I can't even keep track of it.
So it's had to be a very different experience for you when you're finally around other folks that sort of look like you?
Yeah, and because I didn't know my family members, I'm not good at family tree, right? So nephew is this. So just because, in school, for instance, when people were talking, I just oh, I don't really know them. They're halfway around the world. They're in Europe, Africa, Asia, all these places.
So my mother was the first Asian in this little small town of Georgia when she married my father, and so for many years she was the first Asian person this little town Georgia had ever seen. And so I think about what that experience must have been like for her. So when I would do things like, well, you know, nobody really looks like me. I'm the only one in my high school or the only one in my elementary school that look the way I do, or there aren't very many mixed race people. I'm an Army brat, so I can't really say that for sure. Growing up in the military, there's a lot of mixed race people. But anytime we were off the military base, we were always sort of a strange anomaly. So I would think back and no matter how isolated it may have felt for me, I can't even imagine what it would have been like. Not only are you the only Asian person in this entire town, you're the only Asian person they've ever seen, and what that must have been like. So my dream is I've yet to do this, and I don't really have a good reason why I haven't, because I could. Yeah. So I keep telling myself, I'm just gonna go to Hawaii, because I'm gonna know what it's like to just see a bunch of folks who kind of look like me. Go to Polynesia, Fiji, any place where you see someone who looks sort of like me, to know what is that experience to walk into a space where people actually look like you, when your experience has been to be the one who looks different, no matter what context that you're in, that you're always the person that's a little different than everyone else. If I'm in a room full of other Asians, I'm still gonna look different than the other Asians in the room. When I'm in a room full of other African Americans, I still look a little different than a lot of the African Americans in the room. So what is that experience like when you're you're just not different than everybody else? I actually don't know what that experience is like, so I'm just asking, have any of you had that experience?
I had a similar kind of experience growing up in a town that had a very small population. I grew up in it's really loud. I grew up in a town that has a very, very small Jewish population. It was like 95% Italian town. And at least speaking from my experiences, it contributed a lot to a negative body image, negative kind of self-image. Just like, why is everyone so much tanner than me? Why is everyone's hair so much straighter than mine? And it led to me trying my best to fit into that, but obviously I couldn't because I just can't get that tan. Or I just, my hair is curly. And since coming to UConn and becoming more involved, and UConn actually has a fairly sizable Jewish community. I think like 1 in 10 students here are Jewish. Just the experience of having Jewish people wherever I go, going to all these Jewish events, it's been really great, and something that as I'm looking at graduate schools now, something I don't want to leave. Which certainly limits some of the locations I can go to, but it's been a very positive experience just to say, hey, these other people actually look like me. I'm not like this weird looking guy. There's other people that look like that too.
You don't get the same questions. Where are you? Where are you from? What are you? Those kinds of things. How many of you actually think of UConn as a very diverse environment? Just sort of curious. Nobody? Did you come from more diverse environments? You consider UConn to be diverse?
Before I came to UConn stores, I went to UConn West Hartford, and I would say that campus is a lot more diverse. We just saw an array of different people in every class. Like a lot of the times here, I'm the only person of color in my classes. So it's hard to escape.
So most students of color here at UConn do not describe UConn as being a very diverse environment. But white students do. White students at UConn actually consider UConn to be the most diverse place that most of them have ever been. And the truth is it is, because most Connecticut residents, students that come from Connecticut communities, if they're European American, they come from environments that are anywhere from 80 to 90% white. And so the fact that UConn actually has up to 25, 30% of non-white students is in fact the most diverse environment that they've ever been. So their experience of diversity is often very, very different than students of color who are looking at diversity broadly, also looking at diversity for what looks like me. Who are the people that share my experiences, or who I think might share my experiences, who don't necessarily know for sure. And so you're often looking for those connections, looking for those relationships, and you have to put a little bit more effort into finding them. Whereas for majority students, simply being in a classroom oftentimes provides that experience because they are experiencing diversity in a level and in a way that they have not been accustomed to, without having to put the same level of work and effort into it. So that's a very, very different way of seeing the world and how the world sees you. Anyone else have any more reflections or things you want to share? I know it's getting kind of late. Let me just say, I appreciate all of you being here, because you certainly didn't have to be here. There's certainly better ways that you could have spent your time. I don't know how many of you actually got to eat dinner first. This started at 6 o'clock. If you ate beforehand, good planning. If you didn't, I'm so sorry. I hope the cafeteria, well, I'm calling it cafeteria, showing my age. My niece is over here. What are they, Sviggy? Oh, what are they, Michelle?
Dining hall.
Dining halls. I hope the dining halls are still open. They're not? Some of them are open. So I'm even more grateful if your bellies are rumbling. I do apologize that this expanded over the time that you would normally eat. You know, I can be a little bit of a mother hen, so I really do want to make sure you all get something to eat tonight and get a good night. It's midterm time. My niece has told me that. She's preparing for midterm tomorrow. So, Michelle, she's named after me if you haven't figured that piece of it out. I do appreciate the fact that you came to support your auntie, your emo over here, even though you've got a midterm exam. Please don't use that as an excuse if you don't do well on it, okay? just so you know, I'm not gonna cut you any slack if you don't do well on your midterm. But I very much appreciate, I don't get an opportunity to interact with students nearly as much as I used to when I was in the classroom. So this has been really a treat for me in all kinds of ways. One, to be able to watch a video like this and what that represents, but also primarily because of who are all the sponsors in terms of the student organizations that put this event together. It really is very heartwarming for me to see that you all are here and that you all are thinking about these things and sharing these experiences. So I am very, very grateful for having this opportunity. I hope I get a chance again in the future to come to additional events and work with some of you. And if any of you want to come and drop by my office over in the Wheaton Graduate Center, I'm over in the Wheaton Graduate Center. You can find me by email. You're more than welcome to reach out, and I hope I get to see some of you again in the future.
Well, thank you very much on behalf of the Asian American Cultural Center, the Puerto Rican Latin American Cultural Center, and the African American Cultural Center, our mixed program, and our very talkative Hakka students right here. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful evening. We really appreciate it.
Well, I do have something I'm going to give out to you guys just so you have. I was going to do it as an exercise, but then I thought, it's kind of late. I'm not going to make you guys do this. But because Hakka organized this, this is just a little multiracial identity questionnaire. Play with it all you want. The reason why I wanted to share it with you is called the Multiracial Heritage Awareness and Personal Affiliation Scale, Hakka for short. So this is the Hakka scale of multiracial identity. So I'm going to pass this out to you guys. You can take it with you. If you want the actual reference, this is just a little excerpt that you can have to sort of play around with.